Great. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Dale Medeiros. I'm a senior regional planner for the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. And today we have the privilege of being able to host this webinar on virtual power plants and distributed generation in Northern Virginia. Our guest is Ashish Kapoor, Senior Energy and Climate Advisor at the Piedmont Environmental Council, where he works on clean energy policy issues at the local and state level. Ashish also works on innovative agrivoltaics projects in the region. Agrivoltaics combine crop farming, solar energy production, and battery backup. Ashish has worked as a public policy attorney on a range of issues, including environmental and social justice across the United States and even internationally. Most recently, he worked as a national solar consultant at Sunrun, the nation's largest residential solar company. And the reason that we've invited Ashish to join us today is that we've got some really interesting and rather serious energy demands and challenges, particularly with the applications of artificial intelligence and the growth of data center infrastructure across Northern Virginia. And the union of all of these challenges, but also opportunities, requires new and innovative approaches to energy supply and management. This is going to be especially the case with managing not just the energy portfolios across the region, but also some of the climate and social goals of the region, like reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So innovative concepts and policies like virtual power plants are more important than ever. Um, I'm going to turn everything to Ashish, but before I do, just would like to invite everybody to park their questions into the Q&A box. And at the end of Ashish's presentation, we'll address them chronologically. If you're really eager and you wish to be unmuted, please just let me know. I'd be happy to let you speak directly to Ashish. We'll try to wrap everything up before 1 o'clock. So thank you, Ashish, for taking time away from your busy schedule to join us and share with us this really important work.
Great. Thanks so much, Dale. Thanks for having me, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ashish Kapoor. I'm the Senior Energy and Climate Advisor at Piedmont Environmental Council. PEC, really, we do three main things. We do a lot of land conservation work, land use, which, these days is really around data centers, transmission lines, utility scale solar applications, historic districts, and that work. And then our third bucket is we have a community farm located in Loudoun County, right on the edge of the transition area. That's really sort of a demonstration farm. We have a lot of volunteers out. Everything we grow there, we donate to local food pantries. And that's where we've developed the first kind of official crop-based agrivoltaics project in Virginia that combines not only solar energy production and agricultural crop production, which we're running as an experiment, but also has battery backup. So it's sort of keyed up to be sort of this ag solar virtual power plant project, which I'm not going to talk about today, but happy to answer questions around that. So I'm going to be talking about virtual power plants and distributed generation in Northern Virginia. So did my slide turn, Dale?
Yes.
Great. So we'll start with an energy overview, sort of the energy policy. Then we'll talk a little bit about what a virtual power plant is, progress in other states, and then what exactly is going on in Virginia and where might we be headed. So this is a picture of that agrivoltaics project on our farm. But in Virginia we have the Clean Economy Act. So that means by 2045, Dominion needs to be running on 100% renewable energy, and then 2050 for APCO, and 6% of the peak load every year can be distributed generation. So distributed generation is, typically you think rooftop solar, but it's really any energy that you generate and use around the same source. So it could be, parking lot solar or school solar. That's going into feeding the school. And that's relevant when it comes to virtual power plants. We'll talk a little bit about why, and then lastly, the sort of incentive structure for our investor-owned utilities, Dominion and APCO, really revolves around sort of large-scale infrastructure, and that's where they get their guaranteed rate of return. So transmission lines, large gas plants, solar projects. That's where the bias is heavily skewed. So anything that's more in that distributed sort of construct, whether it's rooftop solar, whether it's small scale batteries, agrivoltaics, on the distributed scale, shared solar, there's I think a lot more friction and resistance. But that being said, we've made a lot of progress, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So, but kind of big picture, as Dale alluded to, we have had typically sort of a flat demand curve in most of the country due to energy efficiency improvements, and it's only very recently, as you can see on this chart, that we've seen what started as a sort of regional uptick, but now an uptick we're seeing more and more in areas even outside of Northern Virginia, all around the country, which is a rapidly escalating demand curve. So where we were at around the 23 gigawatts of our peak load in Dominion territory, we were actually in pretty good shape in terms of getting to our renewable goals. In terms of the amount of solar that had been approved and had to be approved by 2035, we were on the right track. But when you double or even triple how much energy needs to be created within the next 10, 15 years, that creates a lot more pressure on ag land to kind of create large scale solar, more pressure to create more gas plants, which we're seeing all these new gas plant applications throughout the Commonwealth. Gas plants that were supposed to be shuttered, or coal plants that were supposed to be shuttered, now have to stay on to accommodate this data center load. So those are the two main kind of constructs, the Clean Economy Act and the demand increasing. And these are just a smattering of different sort of news stories over the last like 6, 7 months. PJM, which is the greater grid that we're connected to, basically going from Illinois over to Jersey and then down to portions of North Carolina, and everything in between. So those capacity prices there, because there's less available energy during peak times, it has really kind of hit record highs. Data centers are sort of having big impacts on local electric bills because the more infrastructure that the utility needs to build, that's rate based, and then we all pay for that. And then of course we had this merger talk around NextEra and Dominion. All while on the federal level, we have clean energy tax credits that have been mostly repealed. Some still remain. Manufacturing tax credit for solar and some other stuff around storage. But for the most part, we had pretty heavy cuts on that front. Virginia is now importing more energy than any other state because of the extreme increases in demand. And yet at the same time, we see on this chart, the vast majority of energy added to the U.S. grid was carbon emission free. I mean, everything aside from that 7% of natural gas, wind, battery storage, and solar. So about 92, 93%. So it is the cheapest form of energy, fastest to connect, and that's what makes virtual power plants pretty compelling. So what is a virtual power plant? Virtual power plant, I have a loose definition here on the bottom right, a system in which an aggregator, so some sort of private aggregator, it could be Tesla, it could be Sonnen, it could be a utility. They manage distributed energy resources. So distributed energy resources can be a smart thermostat, it can be a heat pump, it can be rooftop solar, backup batteries connected to the rooftop solar, so that sort of synergy between the rooftop solar and the batteries is key when we talk about what we're going to be talking about. EV charging, bidirectional charging. So anything you can do at scale to basically lower the demand curve or lower, that peak energy. And I'll show a chart of why virtual power plants are a compelling way to provide that energy during those peak times in the summer or the winter where electric usage is the highest, and that's what we build the grid for. There's some extra cushion on top. That's the most expensive part of the grid. So the more we can kind of bring that down, the more we can kind of do cost-effective sort of management of really these rapidly escalating utility bills. So you can see here pretty much all of those options, but the other leg of it is demand response. So you can also much in the way the smart thermostat changes, your temperature, so you're not using as much electricity during that peak time. You get some sort of incentive for that. So goes a larger, like a data center or larger scale user can curtail their peak usage during peak times. And in a sense, kind of by lowering demand, they're doing the same thing that a battery would do by discharging extra energy to the grid when the grid needs it most. Now, there's some inefficiencies in that I'll talk about, but ultimately it's a lot more difficult to determine what the ultimate impact of demand response is because it may have been something that the large user may have done anyways. So what we're really focusing on today is talking about the impact of solar paired with batteries. But as this chart shows, it can be a whole range of things. So what are the benefits of virtual power plants? So you're producing peak load demand at a lower cost than traditional means. So, the amount of capital that it takes to build a 400 or 500 megawatt gas peaker plant that's maybe operating 20 or 30% of the time, let's say, as opposed to a bunch of folks having rooftop solar with backup battery and that discharging, that battery into the grid during that peak time is a much cheaper way to do it. In fact, studies show it's 40 to 60% cheaper than all of us kind of contributing to a large scale gas plant or peaker plant or something similar. Not only that, these days because of supply chain issues, I mean, gas plants are taking longer and longer to build. So looking at 5-7 year construction timelines, shortages on turbines and other parts, and of course the sort of variability of fuel costs. Meanwhile, rooftop solar paired with batteries, you can get that kind of bought, installed, and turned on in a matter of months. We're working to speed that process up too at the state level, and we've had some success that I can talk about later. But ultimately, a lot faster. Of course, smaller scale, so you have to find policies and ways to do that, on 40,000, 50,000, 100,000 homes, so you can really get the cumulative power of all of that battery storage to get that same impact as the gas plant. And then there's these other benefits. You lessen your impact to ag land and forests. So the more efficient we make our distributed generation, the less that we have to kind of cut down trees and put large scale solar up, the less we have to, take farmland out of production and put solar there. So it also makes, that land conservation ag element a lot more impactful. You're decreasing emissions, so you're not putting new NOx and SOx and particulate into the atmosphere, into our air. You're creating that solar and battery connection. Again, at scale, you're mitigating transmission and new generation impacts. So the more that we can build up the distributed grid, the less new transmission lines, expensive transmission lines, disruptive transmission lines, eyesores, and everything else that comes with new transmission. At scale, VPPs can mitigate that. And then as an individual consumer, now you have solar with battery backup. That battery is what allows you to kind of have full energy independence. It allows you to run your home off the grid, so to speak. So if the power goes out and you only have solar, your solar is going to shut off because your extra solar energy is not going to have anywhere to go. It's not going to be able to go back to the grid. It's really to protect the workers on the grid. But if you have batteries, then you're basically able to create a closed loop system, generating energy during the day, and then you're pulling from those batteries at night or in the evening or in the morning where solar is less plentiful. So that's that additionality when those two things are together. And these sorts of projects also employ a lot more Virginia businesses, smaller distributed generation systems, estimated to kind of employ 10 times more local business than larger scale generation, solar generation. So Brattle Group, which is a firm much like Dunsky that does some great research, works with utilities and nonprofits and NGOs to kind of map, model, analyze the impacts of different types of energy systems. So they did one on virtual power plants a couple years back. So some of these numbers maybe probably gas is a lot more expensive, so there may be some changes, but ultimately, they found that virtual power plant programs could save ratepayers up to $35 billion across the country, 40 to 60% cheaper as I mentioned earlier. One study found that a 900 or 590 megawatt DER portfolio has the potential to provide the same reliable power as a 950 megawatt gas plant. That's the equivalent of um, what they had proposed down in Chesterfield, about a gigawatt, I believe, for that peaker plant. I forget the last cost that I had heard, a couple $1 billion for that one. So a lot cheaper to do it in this way, studies find. In this case, $288 million less, plus all of those additional benefits. So this chart on the left, you can see, this extra 400 megawatts of load over the year. That's that peak load. That's what you're trying to address. 63 hours worth must be addressed to serve that portion. That's where virtual power plants kind of come in. If you can address that with that, rather than building new peaker plants, you can see the differential here in this other chart down the bottom right. So, net cost million per year for gas, 45 million for a 400 megawatt worth of resource adequacy. Batteries are going to be cheaper than that and getting cheaper by the day. But then you can see with VPP how significant that difference is in cost. And that doesn't even take into account all the other conservation benefits, clean air benefits, speed to market benefits that VPPs have. So what do we need to create a robust, strong VPP program in Virginia? So first thing we need to do is protect net metering. So net metering is what gives your solar energy system, let's say on your roof, it's sort of financial viability. So you're generating ton of energy now for this portion of the day, at least here, the sun's out for a little bit. Extra energy not being used by my home is going back out to the grid, and I'm getting a 1-for-1 credit for that. So I may use that credit later this evening. I may use that credit later this year. But net metering kind of exists within that 1 year timeline. So some weeks, some months, you're generating a ton of excess energy. Other months, you're kind of using that banked energy, and your system is built to really even out. So if you've gotten rooftop solar, if you've gotten a quote, that's why they're asking for your kind of year's worth of usage, because they want to build the system based on the year. I'll talk a little bit about what happened with net metering, what Dominion proposed, and what the final decision of the SEC was. But that's the foundational piece that makes solar make sense, because if solar doesn't make sense, then batteries certainly don't make sense. So protecting net metering, legislation enabling virtual power plants in the Commonwealth, and then kind of a robust build out of distributed energy resources. That's really critical. Regulations that enable success. So consumer-owned resources tend to do a lot better than utility-owned resources and utility-run programs. And behind-the-meter storage is what we're going to be focused on. Power walls, LG batteries, that sort of thing that you have in your garage if you have backup batteries. It needs to be user-friendly. So it needs to, programs are great, but if people don't know how to sign up for them, if people don't know how to track them, if people don't know how much money it's saving them, that we're not really going to set them up for success. So the easier it is for people to see the financial benefits of what they're doing and track it and kind of make it into a fun game, the more likelihood you're going to have for expanding your VPP program or pilot. The last is market access. So this is, FERC Order 2222 basically enables or requires RTOs, so regional transmission operators. We're in PJM, but there's also ISOs, independent system operators. So these are sort of the larger grids that are throughout the United States. It requires them to establish DER aggregators. So again, that can be a utility, that can be a private company, but someone using software that knows, hey, okay, this is your battery, this is your battery usage, this is the perfect amount, perfect time to pull from yours. So super kind of granular software that's out there now. Who's managing it? Who has a partnership with the utility? If it's not the utility itself, to kind of provide that energy during those peak times, looking at weather models, looking at usage patterns, and all the other things that go into complex energy modeling. That now needs to be part of what PJM is doing, and coordinating those varied stakeholders, participants, private aggregators, utilities, users, and implementation in PJM starts early next year. So briefly, I'll kind of go through this portion quickly, but I explained what net metering is. Dominion was really trying to undercut net metering, again, because it doesn't really fall into their guaranteed rates of return, and what they make their most revenue on for shareholders. So they were trying to cut the rate, and then instead of that annual netting that I was talking about, they were going to net every 30 minutes. So, okay, do you have excess energy after this 30 minutes? You're compensated for that at a reduced rate, and then every 30 minutes it resets. So you're not banking over the course of the month and rolling over to the next month and looking at that annual usage every 30 minutes, like reduced value, reduced value. So effectively, we intervened in the case. We partnered in our intervention with Solar United Neighbors, Sierra Club, Vote Solar, Clean Virginia, and we had some experts that we hired for the case. And we commissioned a value of solar study. This one was with Dunsky Climate Group, and basically what they did, and what we worked with them to kind of develop is, what are the qualitative benefits of rooftop solar distributed generation? What are the qualitative, quantitative benefits, environmental benefits? Less transmission lines. What's the cost that we can kind of put on that? Less new generation. What's the cost benefit we can put on that? Because the utility won't model those benefits. They won't model the benefits to the water quality. They won't model benefits to less land used, less forested land used, less ag land used. So that whole analysis was it's on our website, on PEC's website. You can look that up. But really, we used it as a tool to kind of create public engagement, and worked with Solar United Neighbors to do some webinars, and then did some of our own. And 1,300 folks commented, did written public comment for the SEC case, and about 50 people actually did public testimony in the case. And ultimately, this study, we found that small scale distributed solar gives substantial value that far exceeds actually what Dominion's original petition was. Instead of cutting it, actually, it should be around 3 times higher, is what we found. And that benefit increases when you pair it with storage, because you get that virtual power plant additionality. So the SEC decision, net metering remains intact. So whether you're a current user or whether you're looking to go solar this summer, we do have the Solarized Piedmont program. There's a Solarized Nova program, all part of the same sort of group that's running this summer. So take a look at that if you're thinking about solar. You can get it at a discounted rate from a vetted installer. So that's protected. Your netting interval will not be shortened. There'd be no decrease in that sort of credited retail rate for the extra energy that you generate. Only at the end of the year, if you have excess energy, that will be compensated at the lower rate now. But your system can still be built to kind of optimize net metering, and a bunch of other stuff, SRECs and things we don't need to get into now, but all of that is retained. So a big win. It should have been obvious, but regardless, we were able to kind of fight as a community and win there. So what have we seen in other states and in other territories when it comes to virtual power plants? So in California, it's just kind of a quick run through. I'm certainly not an expert in what's going on in all of these different territories, but California's had numerous programs, privately run programs. Utilities are also doing some programs. The most robust one is now, I think, last I checked, up to 1.1 gigawatts. So massive virtual power plant program called Demand Side Grid Support. So made up of home batteries, EVs, heat pumps, smart thermostats, et cetera, with varying incentives. So depending on sort of what DER you're using, there can be upfront payments, you get a monthly bill credit, and so on and so forth. Puerto Rico is probably the sort of best example of like a very rapid build out of a virtual power plant for folks that have followed what's happened in Puerto Rico. A lot of blackout issues. Their utility had gone bankrupt some years back. Their hydro plants had kind of fallen apart. So a lot of energy issues there. And so there was a big scale up of distributed generation, and customer owned VPP resources estimated to have kept the grid up at least close to a dozen times over the past year, in preventing a blackout. And I think most incredibly in just 1 year, they went from 40 megawatts to 500 megawatts. So they built the equivalent of a large scale gas peaker plant in 1 year, with all of the added benefits to the individual consumer. We have 80,000 homes enrolled, and I think Sunrun and Solar United Neighbors and some other groups have been really active down there. So pretty cool. Hawaii had something similar, upfront payments. So you kind of have a big battery incentive for the first adopters. You might get, I forget what the exact number was, around $7,000 to $8,000 on a $12,000 power wall. And then as more people buy in, then that steps down and gets cut in half. It gets cut in half, and then you get a monthly bill credit. Again, just kind of giving the utility the right to pull energy from your battery when they need it. So a couple other states, Maryland, regulators recently denied the utilities attempt to own the behind the meter storage market. Behind the meter, again, we're talking about batteries in your garage, batteries connected to your rooftop solar, small scale, and so third parties can run aggregation for their burgeoning program there. Texas often in the news for kind of building all kinds of stuff super fast, and certainly behind the meter storage is no exception. There's numerous VPPs down there because they live in kind of a deregulated environment in which residents can basically choose who supplies their energy. It's made it easier to kind of bring these programs up and running. Sonnen, Tesla, ERCOT, the grid operator there, all have their own programs around, last I checked, around 60 to 100 megawatts each. And then there's a 1 gigawatt smart thermostat program that they're putting up. So looking across the varied regions, some themes that we see, what allows a VPP program to thrive and to kind of get up quickly, because again, we have a huge issue in Nova with data center demand, reliability issues, cost, who's paying for all of this infrastructure for these companies. The answer is you and I. So it's really critical that virtual power plants, are kind of put up in a way that they're built to succeed. So ensuring that it's a competitive market that allows third parties to run aggregation in partnership with the utility. Consumer ownership is another thing that's really been, I think, mostly a common denominator in other virtual power plants in different regions. And then, an opt-out option. You may not want to shed your battery storage because you have a medical event, or there's a guest visiting that has, a hospital bed that needs to run, or a minimum reserve that you can, ensure that you have 20-30% of your battery, even if the utility pulls a certain amount, that you can rest assured that you have enough to do, your core backup functions, or run your essential functions of your home. Those also kind of make people feel like they have some ownership over what's going on. So enabling legislation in Virginia, I'll just kind of call out a few sort of key pieces, and if we have time in the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about other stuff. But what we did, after a couple of tough years, we did have a good succession when it comes to distributed generation and virtual power plants. So the Distributed Generation Expansion Act, this effectively quintuples the amount of distributed generation that Dominion wants to build. It's something that we and many of our partners have been working on for some time. It's something that a lot of folks agree on. We hear it all the time. Why don't you put it on parking lots? Why don't you put it on rooftops? Why don't you put it on brownfields? Well, this legislation effectively builds on previous attempts at parking lot solar and things like that really requires a utility to build a gigawatt of solar on previously disturbed sites, so brownfields, landfills, parking lots, coal fields, and then every year, the amount of the energy being built that needs to be renewable, that needs to be distributed generation rather, that number has also gone up 5 times. So that was signed into law. So one of the benefits you're going to see as a result of that, most likely, is those SREC values that you or one of the benefits of having a rooftop solar system or any distributed generation. Those values will go up because Dominion needs to procure more distributed generation. Smart rooftop permitting. So, you know, in America and generally, and it varies county to county, we're slow to kind of permit solar and get the county permits. We look at places like Australia. You can buy a rooftop solar system and get it installed and get it turned on, typically within a week. So that allows installers to really set up shop in a community and then get a bunch of projects installed and turned on pretty quickly. And that decreases, one of the larger soft costs of rooftop solar. And not just the permitting costs, but just the ability for installers to kind of set up shop in certain areas and to know that they can get things kind of turn around and put in quickly at scale within a region is part of the reason why rooftop solar costs 1/3 the amount in places like Australia, because it's just so much faster to kind of put it in and connect and permit. So this will set up virtual permitting. It's going to take a couple of years to fully get going, but kind of a state virtual permitting solar app plus type model, which some localities already have. Places like I think it's Leesburg or Sterling. There's some counties that have it, like Culpeper and Prince William's working on adopting it. That just speeds up rooftop permitting. Distributed Energy Task Force, again, just getting some industry folks, local government folks, and others together to figure out how we can speed up through what incentives do we need, what further legislation do we need, what permitting benefits do we need to really scale up distributed generation and backup storage, which is the foundational element for virtual power plants. And then particularly on the virtual power plant side of things, we had an APCO bill for Appalachian Power that was also signed into law. So this will be a 150 megawatt pilot. APCO actually has a pretty high storage attachment rate for new solar projects. I think partially because the bills are going up so high, and there's also a lot more sort of end of line users and reliability issues. So people are really attracted to that. And then in co-ops, so co-ops like REC or Novec and others now have the right and the ability to set up their own virtual power plant. There's no set pilot program like APCO, and in the next slide I'll talk about Dominion, but they have the ability to do that. And I think this is something that's really compelling because batteries, storage, virtual power plants, grid scale storage. When you install that in a kind of investor-owned utility region, the ratepayers in that region may not see the direct immediate economic benefit. But when they've done batteries kind of like that in places like Danville and a co-op there, you get that immediate benefit because that's that much less energy that co-op has to buy. That's that much less kind of new transmission impact or distribution grid upgrades that they have to put in. So that cost saving seems like it's more direct, and the benefits to affordability for the average ratepayer are a lot more direct. And I think that's particularly compelling generally, but especially now. And then last slide I have is Dominion's virtual power plant. So the Community Energy Act was signed into law last year by the previous governor, Governor Youngkin. And this is 450 megawatts of DERs. This is a pilot project that's meant to last a couple years. So fairly robust. That includes home batteries, heat pumps, smart thermostats, and demand response as well, which I talked about at the top of this presentation. But that's something that is getting stood up now as a pilot. There has to be at least of that 450 megawatts, at least 15 megawatts have to be storage. So that pilot has been filed with the SEC, and stakeholders, including PEC, have given input. The deadline for that was May 11th. And really what we were asking for and what others have been asking for is, a greater portion of the program capacity should be budgeted to battery programs rather than load curtailment. Load curtailment, is the lowest hanging fruit. It doesn't have all those extra benefits that backup storage and DERs do. And it's more difficult to track what the actual benefit is through load curtailment. So we've requested through our comments for a greater portion of batteries and to reject Dominion's additional proposal to reduce compensation for net metering customers that are enrolled in the VPP. A couple other quick points. Kind of bloated cost of battery installment. There was sort of an additional 5K added on to each battery. So that really undercuts the real affordability benefits of virtual power plants and behind the meter storage. So talking about lowering that demand response threshold and increasing the storage is sort of the key ask, and I think will be critical to making sure that this program is really set up to expand and to thrive because we really need it now. It's pretty urgent. So it would be a shame if the program were not set up to kind of really level up in a short period of time. So I will stop there.
That's great. I have just a quick question. Is what are the chances, or has the specific region of the state for the Dominion virtual power plant pilot been picked? And if not, how would its location in Northern Virginia or not in Northern Virginia affect Northern Virginia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now we don't know what sort of areas, what projects will be selected. That will have clarity on probably moving into like late summer, August, September. So I will certainly anything I hear I'll share, but we're also staying tuned. We have a couple of projects that we'd love to be part of this initial program, and our hope is more and more people can be a part of it and see the direct benefits, especially in Northern Virginia where there's so much grid pressure, and recent heat wave had diesel generators on data centers kind of turning on, and we've seen footage on some of those. So this can help mitigate against all of that as the days get hotter.
Yeah. It's a nice segue then into the first question that was asked, which is, what do you see as the role of the upcoming DER task force in this space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you can play a robust role. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be up to the participants, and there's a range of industry folks, nonprofits, NGOs haven't really been selected yet, but I think they're very tapped in, the folks that are in the energy space and that will likely be part of it on the battery leg of it. So, whether that looks like an incentive or a permitting benefit for backup batteries, or some sort of requirement after a certain point of market penetration for rooftop solar that we have to have batteries attached. I think it's all up for a conversation, and I think the other really compelling thing is, I briefly talked about agrivoltaics, but a lot of rural areas, a lot of farmers are very familiar with the idea of having backup diesel generators. So if you're able to kind of turn, and whether it's the task force or the agrivoltaics work group, to talk about how can we incentivize farmers to kind of turn to backup batteries instead of diesel, they can be part of this virtual power plant program too. So I guess that's a long way of saying I don't know yet, but but it will definitely be deeply in consideration, the storage part of it for sure.
Yeah, yeah, let us know. It'd be interesting to see if it has any potential application up here. Rodney Sobin writes, then please elaborate on demand response, responding to periods of very high demand from routine use of DERs, like daily charging and use of batteries to manage peaks and avoid DR events. Both are valuable.
Yeah, both are valuable, especially when we're talking about EV charging, an incentive for you to charge your EV in the night. That would be sort of part of that demand response. So you're not putting extra load on the grid. But on the flip side, some regions are requiring news chargers to be bidirectional chargers. So during the daytime, if you're plugged in, and we can actually pull from that large car battery and put energy onto the grid when we need it most. that serves that sort of more that traditional sort of battery discharge benefit. So it can go both ways. Both are very valuable and both effectively do the same thing. Whether you're reducing the demand curve or you're giving more energy when the demand is high, and I think most of the newer EVs are starting to have bidirectional batteries. Not all of them. Not all of the previous EVs have that. So that's going to be part of the virtual power plant program for sure.
And thanks, Rodney, for slipping in the RMI VPP flip book into the chat box. It looks really, really interesting. I wanted to, just a quick question. You had a slide that talked about the DGRPS goals, 1%, 4.5%, and 5%. What were the timeframes for those?
Good question. I'd have to check exactly. I think it's around 2030 ish.
Okay.
If you look
For
up the Distributed Generation Expansion Act, it'll have it in there to hit the 4.5%, and then it goes into the 5% a couple years after that. So we have a couple years yet.
Great. And then a lot of our participants represent local governments and their sustainability or energy portfolios and programs. And I was wondering whether you could just share your insights into ways in which a local government like Alexandria or Fairfax or Prince William might consider the kinds of low-hanging fruit in terms of policy development or programs that they're already undertaking or they might consider undertaking that would support expansion of virtual power plants and distributed generation.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's a range of things that localities can do, but one of the biggest is around permitting. So making it easier and faster to permit rooftop solar systems with storage, but really effectively rooftop solar systems. That there is um, the National Lab of the Rockies, formerly known as National Renewable Energy Lab, developed Solar App Plus, and with IREC was part of that too. And basically, that's that virtual permitting I was talking about earlier, and that really has sped up the timeline in places like I'll give Culpeper as an example because that's within the PEC footprint. But you're able to basically save an FTE. So from a pure sort of county resources perspective, it's a win. And you're able to kind of get rooftop solar projects. Some of these localities, it was taking months, and 90% of those you can do literally instantly. So that's going to speed up that sort of connection and getting batteries up to scale. Uh, the other thing I'd say is just looking at your local ordinances and making sure that there aren't things that are just sort of unnecessarily restrictive when it comes to where batteries can be located, how much clearance around the battery. Technology has changed. LFP batteries are a lot more stable and have a lot less fire risk than previous iterations. So as the technology changes, one of the things that we've done, not for this scale yet, but for the storage legislation that we worked on this session with Delegate Sullivan's office, was a stakeholder group. So basically, increasing how many larger grid scale batteries need to be built. That does the same thing as virtual power plants insofar as makes our existing generating capacity more efficient, mitigates transmission impacts, and all that. But we need to have localities be part of that conversation. So there's a stakeholder group that will be administered. We've had some initial conversations with the delegate, but the point is having fire chiefs, having local government officials, boards of supervisors, get together and say, okay, if you can give us a model ordinance for grid scale batteries and best practices that go through the stakeholder group, so we can mitigate fire risk. If a fire were to happen, we know how best to fight it, and the local fire department is trained, and so they know what to do. So I think that had a lot of sort of support at the local level, and why we developed that. I think something similar in whether it's done through the legislature, whether it's just localities talking to each other. One, making sure that we train our fire sort of departments at the local level so they know what to do, and that the code is not at the same time overly restrictive. Are there unnecessary buffers if you have a couple power walls in a shed on ag land? Um, is there code, or are we just looking at, grid scale battery guidance? So kind of having more granular guidance on the ordinance level, I think, for batteries would also be really helpful.
Great. And the comments about the consumption of water or the savings of water consumption through VPPs, and the PEC report mentions it, but whether you have any specific numbers or data that you might be able to share or convey.
Water savings from virtual power plants.
Yeah, in general.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have data on that. It's a good flag. I can run that by the folks that are working on, the data center work and water usage work at the local level. What I will say is water quality benefits. The more that we can build up robust distributed generation with storage, that's less large scale solar. That's less sort of all the sort of runoff impacts that come from larger scale generation construction. We're optimizing our built environment and
Mm.
really maximizing it with storage. You're going to have water quality benefits, but water usage, I don't have data on that.
Yeah. And then Heidi Bonifon writes about bidirectionality from car batteries, and is that amount capped? And suggests that it would make an EV car owner nervous, if not, perhaps.
The amount in the virtual power plant program, it's not capped. So that's part of Dominion's proposal. I don't know if they have anything specific. I'm not intimately involved in the case, so maybe somebody else has an idea of if they put an actual requirement or restriction on how much bidirectional EV benefits there's going to be in the pilot program.
Okay, Kelly, I'm going to unmute you. Give me a second because you have a comment. There you go. Oh, Kelly, sorry. Kelly, you're unmuted. You can comment. Um, no, we were just unmuted for a minute ago. No worries. And I just noticed that Rodney also sent to us a link to the New York Interagency Fire Safety Working Group, CERTA, a link. I have a question. What would a strategy look like for a local government? Not just in terms of the policies, but would it be part of a comprehensive energy or climate strategy, or would it be a specific uh, sort of programmatic goals? If you were,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple ways to go for a county. Is there funding available for some sort of county-based incentive for virtual power plants, especially the counties that are, you know, housing data centers? I feel like there's increased responsibility and benefits to really accelerating, not waiting for a pilot program to go through, the rigors and then building that program up. I mean, there's enough evidence out there to look at other states, other localities, and stand up a program. Now, I think it's probably a holistic approach of some sort of incentive is always great, but if you can't provide that, I think that permitting leg of it, and being able to educate folks is another important part of people adopting storage. Storage. Now that a lot of the federal stuff and incentives are gone, it does typically double the cost of your solar system. So it may be worth just both having some educational outreach and having it part of a climate program and putting that part together for folks. How do batteries in my garage contribute to all these other varied benefits that we're talking about? It's not obvious, I don't think, for the average person. You know, Tying something like this to conservation, it may seem like it's a big leap, but it's there and it's true, and the benefits just need to be kind of educated and sort of socialized through varied spaces. So, um, but money always helps if there is something that can be done at the county level. I know that's not always possible for a lot of counties.
I don't see any other questions that have been added since the last were answered. If there's nothing else that people wish to ask, I think we'll set everyone free, finish their lunches, and get back to work for the rest of the afternoon. Just want to say, Ashish, thank you so much for taking time to be with us. Um, it was wonderful, and I look forward to staying in touch and doing something like this again in the near future.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye.